So remember last week when I said, welcome to episode 2? Well, I was wrong. And apparently this week is episode 2. So that's one in the box of winning at podcasting for me. But, we all have to, laugh at ourselves, which I do pretty much on a regular basis, and say, well, I made a mistake. So this is actually episode 2 of the Unbusiness podcast. We are thankfully still talking about conflict, so that I didn't screw that up completely. But apparently numbering episodes is very, very challenging for me. So thank you for your patience. I promise going forward. Actually, just kidding. I literally cannot make that promise. I will likely screw up another episode number because, details like that, I struggle with them. But that's why I have my amazing podcast producer, Don Jackson, who is back with me. And I didn't even give him a shout out in the last 2 episodes. So you should know that anybody who listened to the Fearless Business podcast when I was hosting it knows that Don from the Raven Media Group is my lovely producer. And I brought him back because he is that much fun to work with. And if I can convince him, I may even actually get him to come on one of these episodes, even though we're doing video. And I will tell you, man, he hates video. But you know what? I don't care. Welcome to episode 2 of season 1 of the Unbusiness podcast. We are back talking about conflict. I know I made you super uncomfortable the last time, and I'm okay with it. Last time we talked, I talked all about your feelings about conflict, how you are emotionally connected to conflict. And I really hope that you actually, did my homework and you are thinking about, well, what is my relationship to conflict? Some of you, I think most of you actually are probably like, ooh, I hate it. It's the worst. Who likes conflict? I mean, who wants to argue besides my 10-year-old? He loves to argue. Most people don't. Then there are some people out there, they love to argue. We're going to have a whole other episode on people who love to argue. So we're not going to talk about that. And, maybe a few of you are neutral on it, but for the most part, conflict really brings up some pretty visceral reactions. I, like you, I used to hate conflict. Now I'm kind of neutral on it. I don't mind it. I'm not looking for it. Although sometimes I do like a good negotiation with my 10-year-old. He always wins though. But yeah, so my relationship has changed, and my relationship to conflict has changed because I have done a lot of work around my feelings on it and come up with a lot of tips and tricks. So today in episode 2, I hope I got that right, we are talking about handling conflict. And I have a whole bunch of tips and tricks for you about handling conflict. So we're going to walk through them, and you're going to be able to take notes or, make a mental note and think to yourself, here's what I can do when faced with conflict. So I do want to start with a story because I promised you in the beginning when I did our very first introductory episode that we'd have a lot of stories. And I feel like a lot of times we share our success stories. So I feel like I need to share a failure story with you in the entrance of full transparencies of not only do I sometimes mess up numbers of episodes, but I do make mistakes when I am in negotiations and when I am dealing with conflict. I was working on a particularly contentious case for a client, and this was a trademark infringement case. My client was 100% legally correct, but the other side had a bully. And we're going to talk about bullies. We're going to talk about people who thrive on conflict in a really negative way in a later episode. But needless to say, bullies trigger me in a big way because I am really all about fairness and justice, and I hate bullies. And so this particular adversary, I guess I'll say, because oddly, that's what lawyers call each other, but the attorney on the other side and even their client, they were truly trademark bullies. They were 100% legally wrong, but what they had was money. And my client didn't have as much money. So my client was being bullied pretty badly. And we got to a point in the negotiations where it actually would have been really easy to just kind of resolve the issue. But the other side was dug in on a point. they were 100% going to legally lose if we went to court, but they knew my client was never going to take them to court. So I was feeling really emotional because I was really angry on behalf of my client. And that is going to be a tip that you're going to hear a little bit later. Don't be emotional. But I was feeling pretty emotional. I can't lie. At a certain point, sometimes I just feel really protective of my clients. And I was really angry. And when I got on the call with the other attorney, because I'm a big fan of phone calls, as I said before, a lot better than putting stuff in email, he said something really nasty and it just triggered me. And I lost my temper. That was bad. And I shouldn't have done it. And I knew it, but I just was so fed up. It had been ongoing for so long and my client was just really being taken advantage of. And it halted the conversation. And frankly, I'm very lucky to say that in the end, we ended up settling it. It didn't have too much of a negative impact, but it was really not my finest moment. And so I will remind you that even me with 16 years of experience doing this, I do have those moments. And in those moments, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks on how to deal with that. But it is important to note, we are all human. We are not perfect and you will make mistakes. So there will be times where something will absolutely emotionally trigger you, and that is okay. It's how you handle it afterwards. That's the key to really good conflict resolution. So let's kick into it. Let's get started. Now that we've all been vulnerable and you can all think about a time where you didn't handle conflict as well as you wanted. And then after you do that, I actually want you to think about a time that you handled it beautifully, because we have to balance out our negative with our positive. And I'm sure there's times where you have done a wonderful job. So my first tip for you when faced with conflict is a really kind of obvious one, but important. I want you to just accept and acknowledge that there's conflict. Sometimes we like to avoid it. We kind of bury our head in the sand and we think, oh no, there's no problem here. No. If you think there's conflict, there likely is. And ignoring it is not going to make it go away. Sometimes it's as in your face as like a cease and desist that we pretend isn't happening. Sometimes it's a passive aggressive email from a client. Sometimes it's that instance where I talked about in a last episode where I had gone out to dinner with a friend and it was clear that that friend was super uncomfortable. There was nothing really being said, but I knew that was going to lead to conflict. So take a moment and accept it and acknowledge it. Because as soon as you accept it and acknowledge it, you're going to feel so much better. It's freeing. We're not avoiding it anymore. And then we can take the steps to deal with it. So we've accepted and we've acknowledged there's some kind of conflict. Conflict, like I said, there's such a varying range. The conflict that I deal with in my legal practice, that's some of the most extreme conflict, right? It is aggressive. It can be nasty. But there's also conflict like you get a bad review from a client, or you get some feedback you didn't want to hear, or your employee is unhappy, or you're unhappy with your employee. It doesn't always have to be, aimed at you. It could be you feeling conflict towards someone else. So accepting and acknowledging that there is conflict is really key to kicking things off. The next thing you have to do, and this one's so hard, and this is where I failed in my story, is you have to remain calm. Remaining calm for me means sometimes I got to take some deep breaths. It's what I say to my kids all the time. I'm like, take a breath. I understand you're frustrated. Just take a few breaths. Pause for a moment, gather yourself. If I would have done that in that story, if I wouldn't have just reacted like that, it would have been so much better. I just needed that minute to pause and gather myself. And the other really important thing, particularly when you're not in a bullying situation, it can be very difficult, but even in the bullying situation, this does matter. You have to recognize that there are two sides to every story. There's information that you don't have. You have your side of the story. They have their side of the story. And then we sort of have our neutral, the three sides, I guess I should say. But recognize that the story that you feel and the emotions that you feel and what you're perceiving may not be the entire story. So once you go in with that attitude of curiosity, of calmness, it really sets you up for what your next steps are. By the time I got to this phase, the bullying client is what we're going to call them, I was no longer able to accept that there were two sides. I was no longer able to really be calm about it. And I had to actually bring myself back because it was to the detriment of the situation. Me being angry was not helping anybody. It never helps. You can be angry just outside of the conflict. So I definitely went and took a run to get rid of some of that rage. But in the moment, being angry, it just doesn't help. Doesn't mean that somebody can roll all over you, but being angry isn't the way to go. The other thing I want you to do while you're remaining calm and you're accepting and acknowledging conflict is try not to anticipate the worst. I am queen of this, as anyone who knows me knows, and I fight against it on a regular basis. Try not to imagine that the world is completely on fire, that everything is ending, that this is going to make or break you, because I will tell you that I deal with conflict every single day in my practice, and very rarely does it actually end things in a horrific way to the point that people can't come back from it. You can always come back, and it's not always the worst. And sometimes some really amazing things come out of conflict once you navigate them. Sometimes it's something you didn't even know that you needed. So try not to anticipate the worst. Try to stay in the moment and deal with the information that you have. So right now, we're just dealing with our initial reactions. We're accepting and acknowledging. We're remaining calm, whatever that looks like for you. Deep breaths, taking a pause, stepping back, and also trying to keep an open mind to ways that this can be resolved. So once we've sort of managed our own emotion, we now need to manage our relationship with the other person. And so for me, the best default is I start to listen. So I want to actively listening to determine what the actual source is. Sometimes the source is not what you think it is. So in this particular instance, I realized my story about the trademark infringer, I realized that the source was actually not the owner of the trademark, but an investor in their business that was putting a crazy amount of pressure on the other side. And so the other side, I don't actually think at the end of the day wanted to advance all of those positions, but they were being forced to. So there was more to the source. And so once I started to dig deeper and I was actually able to calm down and sort of figure out what the source of the conflict was, that's where conflict resolution starts coming from. Don't assume you know, because you're missing a lot of facts. So go into fact-finding mode. Rather than reactive mode, rather than, having a freak out, start asking questions. And do it in a way that you're actively listening to the answers. And active listening means you're just listening. You are completely focused on what the other person is saying. You are not focused on what you want to say, how mad you are, if you're hungry, whatever the case may be. You are focused solely on the position and what the other person is saying to you. So listen, ask open-ended questions. You could even start with, where is this coming from? Or tell me more about what the problem is. Just make it an open-ended question so that they'll start talking and you can kind of gather yourself. When you're in the midst of conflict and you're actively listening, avoid interrupting. That is one of the biggest pet peeves of anybody who's having a conversation. And I know you're going to say to me, well, I get interrupted all the time. I mean, welcome to my world. I get interrupted in almost every single conversation that I have. It's just the way that it is. And so I have learned how to navigate those situations. But you yourself don't need to add to the problem. So avoid interrupting other people when they're talking. Let them go. And even when they're done, just pause for a second. Let them gather their thoughts. They may have more that they have to say. And if someone's interrupting you, just ask for the courtesy that they don't. If someone keeps interrupting me, I say to them, hey, listen, I know you have a lot to say. I do too. But I'm just going to ask if you could let me finish my thought. I promise I will extend you that same courtesy. It stops people in their tracks. And you've said it with a lot of kindness instead of saying, hey, quit interrupting me. This is really ridiculous. So don't interrupt and ask for the same courtesies. When you are asking your questions, and having really good questions is really critical. So if you're faced with conflict and you're not ready to deal with that conflict or ask the questions, take a pause and give yourself a chance to gather your thoughts so you can ask the questions that you need the answers to. Sometimes that means that you have to have a conversation at a later date. Don't waste that conversation. If someone raises a problem to you and you're really not ready to have the conversation, I would say to them, this is incredibly important to me. I want to take a few minutes to think about what we need to talk about and how we can resolve this. Can we set up another call maybe later or tomorrow? Take the time to gather your thoughts. If you don't have that luxury, as best as you can, ask wide open-ended questions. And then what you want to do when you're active listening, and the way that I actively listen is I actually take really, really copious notes, because otherwise I'm just never going to remember what it is somebody is saying to me. And it allows me to do two different things. I'm listening and I'm writing, but I'm focused solely on the one task. And so you want to repeat back what they say to you to make sure you understand it, and ask clarifying questions. Your goal, your sole goal, after we've sort of mentally prepared for our conflict, is to essentially say to yourself, let me get as much information as I can. I mean, ask for everything. You never know what's going to be important. And the other really great thing about it is the other person feels heard. They feel like you care about this conflict. They feel like you actually want to resolve it. So asking a lot of open-ended questions and listening is only going to help diffuse any kind of anger or rage, because it's really hard for someone to stay angry, one, when you're not engaging with them, and two, when you're asking them for what they need and what they're thinking. So that's really important. Once you have all of your information, you're going to want to analyze the conflict. You're going to want to think about a couple of different things, like what triggered the conflict, why are you angry, why are they angry, who are you angry with if you are angry? Maybe you're not angry, but if you are, who's angry, why are they angry, and what are these feelings? What are you not getting that you want on both sides? So what is missing, what is causing the conflict, and what are you afraid of losing? That's another really critical component to dealing with conflict, is thinking about, like, what do I really want and what am I afraid I'm going to lose? You know, a lot of times in like service-based businesses, we're afraid we're going to lose clients. We're afraid someone's going to say something bad about us. We're afraid that, you know, our key employee is going to quit. Or frankly, we're afraid that we're going to get a reputation of being difficult to work with. There's a million different things that people are afraid of. You have to acknowledge that as part of the conflict. The conflict is not just about the actual facts of the issue, but there's a lot of emotions involved in conflict, even though we need to separate out those emotions, because they should never guide what it is that we're doing within conflict. So you really want to think about, one, what is the conflict? What's the source, where it's coming from? What are the emotions that are tied up to it? And how can we resolve it? So I like to come to sort of a large global resolution. Once we have something in common that we can agree to, let's end the relationship. Let's continue the relationship. Let's change the relationship. Whatever the global resolution is, we can then deal with all of the different details. But we are then working together out of conflict to get to a common ground, right? So with this particularly bullying trademark client that I was talking about, our common ground ultimately was that the two parties needed to coexist in some way. And that's where we came to. We said we have to find a way to live together. So what are the details of that? And once we started moving towards that, some of the anger went away, because we thought, okay, we have this resolution, but let's get to all the details of it. So seek that global resolution, see if you can get sort of a larger one, and then we'll figure out the details. And believe me, the details can cause conflict too, but it's a great way to sort of manage some of those big emotions around conflict. The other really important thing I want you to remember is this is not a race. 9 times out of 10, you're not under a deadline. You can take your time. Look, there are deadlines. We could talk about what that looks like. But here in these instances, the deadline is usually not the same day or tomorrow, because it's really hard to get something resolved when you're under an extreme deadline like that. So if you have the luxury of time, take it. There's no reason that you have to resolve conflict instantly. You certainly can diffuse conflict, you can diffuse emotion, but you may not come up with a resolution immediately, and that's okay. I think leaving yourselves and the other person that you're dealing with in a decent enough spot that you can walk away and think, let's take some time to really analyze this and work through this together, it's going to be really, really beneficial. So the more time that you can give yourself, the better. And remain patient. I know it's really hard. I know we don't want it hanging over our heads, but sometimes these things take a lot of time. Sometimes they can take months. And as much as that's not ideal, being patient is really, really key, because it allows you to do things correctly. Some other tips while you're dealing with conflict is aim to work collaboratively. I was having a conversation with another attorney that I know really well, and one of the things they commented me on is they're like, you're so collaborative. Sometimes it surprises me because we're taught not to be. But I find that we end up coming to the same resolution, and it's just way less stress. Even if the other person's not trying to be collaborative, to have me sit and dig in, I'm really solutions oriented. I'm really goal oriented. I want to come up with a resolution and find a way to get there. It just makes managing conflict so much easier. Doesn't mean I give in on everything. It doesn't mean that I'm overly nice or allow myself to, be railroaded over. But it does mean that my aim is always to just work together. You can get so much more accomplished, and you can get so much more if you're aiming to work together. Always take the high road. Always remain calm. From my example, I could have gone really wrong and I got really lucky, but going into a rage, it never, ever works. It's kind of like that last tequila shot at the end of a night. No one ever says, I'm so happy I took that last tequila shot. Much like no one ever says, wow, I'm really happy I lost my temper. Everybody thought that was great. So try to remain calm. If you can't, end the conversation. And if the other side isn't extending that same courtesy, do the same. I've ended many a conversation where somebody was screaming at me, and honestly, I don't want to be yelled at, and I don't have to be yelled at. It's not necessary. And if you have to, set ground rules. No raising our voice, no interrupting. Let's just get this conversation going and let's get it done. Let's work together. Let's just do it. There's absolutely no reason that it needs to be heated. And if it is heated, take a beat, go back up to the top, acknowledge, and relax. Finally, I want you to focus on the fact that you need to maintain professionalism. This is business, because we're talking about conflict resolution in business. This is purely business, and you cannot personalize it. So in the instance, my client that I gave you felt really personal to her. She thought, why is this person bullying me? What did I ever do to them? She was wrong place, wrong time. And as hard as that is to recognize, sometimes when you take the emotion out of it, it makes it a little bit easier. It is absolutely not personal. It has nothing to do with you and everything to do with business. So keeping that frame of mind that this is not personal, even when it does feel personal, is really going to help you towards conflict resolution 100%. So in the vein of sort of looking at things collaboratively, you want to find areas where you can agree. I'm always trying to find areas where I can agree. It's kind of like that little Venn diagram, and we're looking for the little areas where everybody feels good and happy. And so once we find areas where we can agree, we can focus on them. They'll make us feel good, and then we'll go back to the places we don't agree. We also want to make sure we leave things in the past. There's always going to be hurt feelings. People are going to, much like when I yelled at that lawyer, although he had yelled at me about 100 times, we got to leave that in the past. I had to let that go, and so did he. And really just continue to focus on the resolution, lose the thoughts of positions and fairness and equity and justice and all of those things. When you get wrapped up in that and you just focus on how can we resolve this with the least possible amount of emotional, and to get as much as I possibly can, that's really what the focus should ultimately be. And finally, I want you to remember, maintain confidentiality. Make sure you're not talking about this with everybody. If you have a few trusted advisors, that's a great thing, but posting conflict all over social media, it never helps anybody. It really just ends up coming back to bite you. So I'm really of the mindset that find a good advisor, whether it's your lawyer, whether it's your, business bestie, or whoever, your partner, whoever that is, find one or two people who are incredibly trustworthy. Talk to them about it, because getting it off your chest is going to be helpful, and it's going to help you manage those feelings and manage what you're doing with this conflict. And sometimes it gives you another alternative. Certainly I strategize with clients all the time when it comes to conflict and negotiations. And sometimes I come up with an option and they're like, oh my God, I never even thought about that, because I'm not in the middle of it. I'm not emotional towards it. So finding a neutral, trustworthy third party is key. Posting in a Facebook group, not a great idea. And I just don't think that ever, one, gives you great advice, and two, the professionalism isn't great. So keep it confidential, maintain as much professionalism as you possibly can. And so that's sort of my framework for dealing with conflict. We have a lot more that I'm going to cover over the season. But if you stay tuned next week, I want to give you some real life examples, because I've given you some stories here and there. I've given you a bunch of tips, but I want to take all these tips and I want to break down a couple of real life client stories that I experienced and came to actual resolutions. Obviously, we're going to protect details and names because of confidentiality, but certainly the facts will be there, and you'll be able to, I think, take what we've talked about and actually see how it's applied in real life. So thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed episode 2 of the Unbusiness Podcast. We would love, if you love this podcast, if you want to subscribe, or you can leave us a review. any 5-star reviews would be amazing. We greatly appreciate it. It allows other people to find us. Also, if you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel, because these are on video as well, we'd love that also. Any emails or any information or anything you'd like to hear us talking about, feel free and shoot me an email as well. We're going to drop all the links and all the contact information in the show notes. So thanks so much, and we will see you next week.